So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Narrating Cold War conference, and welcome to HKBU. And you are watching Channel 5 right now. It's the national and regional identities. So my name is Winnie Wu. I am PhD student at the Academy of Film, and next to me is Matea, assistant professor, also at Academy of Film. So we are very ready and excited to discuss some arts and cinema that's related to identities in Cold War. We have 5 presenters today, so the schedule is quite packed, and each presenter will have 15 minutes to present. And we also have Q&A sections after the presentations. So without further ado, we will have the first presenter, Ms. Zhou from Beijing Normal University, and her doctoral research focus is on Central Asian cinema, and she will be presenting a paper on that expertise. So let's welcome Ms. Zhou.
So sorry, the program is have some problems.
Take your time, don't worry. Okay. So when because Zhou has some technical problems, so is it okay that we switch the order? And if the next presenter, Güldeniz, is ready, then we will push forward her presentation.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Okay. So do you hear me right now?
That's perfect.
Okay. So I'm gonna share my screen with you then. I hope it works. Okay, do you see it?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, so this is the title of my paper. It is Empire Flashbacks in Cold War Turkey. So I'm going to mention 1960s and 70s, and this period, it is obviously the Cold War period. And during this time, Turkey went through 2 military interventions. There was this migration to cities and the rise of the populist right, of course, the rise of anti-communism. There was an economic crisis as well. And there was this US embargo following Turkey's intervention in Cyprus, which somehow made Turkey much more isolated in its foreign policy. And there were increasing social movements, and everything somehow coincided with a phenomenal production and consumption of Turkish cinema. During this time period, nearly 4,500 films were produced, and the number of annual tickets sold was more than 5 times than Turkey's population. And these films were all in low quality with poor spatial effects, with poor sound recording. They used the same props again and again, same settings again and again. There were too many continuity mistakes. But despite that, they were unbelievably popular. And they most of the time, intellectual elites perceived them as examples of bad taste. And a considerable proportion of these films were action-adventure films taking place in historical and or politically significant geographies. the ones featuring comic book heroes such as Karaoğlan Tarkan, Malkoçoğlu, Kara Murat were big blockbusters, among many others, including the countless ones like Kara Orkun, Kara Davut, Çal Hasan, Kara Pençe. Anyway, so these films, as you can just understand from their posters here, they all had these swords masters. They all had these heroes riding their horses. So at the end, they all provided nationalist messages. So what they did actually was to visualize a national past in which Turks were all superior and defeated all enemies, thanks to their national heroes that could be taken as the representative of ideal Turkish citizen. And during this time, given its frequency and popularity, cinema going could be considered as habitual and hence a significant social routine for a significant portion of the population. So relying on this, one could argue that the viewers were routinely exposed to and received these films, which could be considered benevolent quotidian reproductions of Turkish national identity. So here, Michael Blick's concept of banal nationalism could be adopted, for example. So, you know, he mentions how national identity is routinely constructed in everyday life, similar to unnoticed flags as opposed to consciously waved flags. So the films here could be considered as unnoticed flags that people were exposed to. And it could also be assumed let's mention this very briefly. Let's put it this way: through these widely circulated films, the viewers were exposed to the same nationalistic discourses, same symbolism, so they all experienced the same thing. Okay, my paper is about how these films visualize nationalist spaces. Here I refer to various other intellectuals, and I don't need to go over them, I guess. So there is this, for example, you know, the construction of space is always very significant, and it is always an indispensable element of nation building. And it at the end transforms a territory into homeland, and this home could be the land on which the nation currently lives, or it could be the land that has been lost in the past, or it could be a promised land of future. So it could also be where the nation was born, or where it reached to its great and glorious days, or the place where the nation attains the potential to do all this. So Mayer, for example, claims nationalists consider the land as the sacred center of resources, livelihood, output, and energy. So as a result of everything, all these national building processes, hills and rivers, woods cease to be merely familiar. They become ideological as sites of shrines, battles, and birthplace. And so the places, I am skipping this ethnoscape concept by Anthony Smith, but at the end, as Smith says, the places where holy men and heroes walked and thought, fought and judged, prayed and died are felt to be holy themselves, testifying to the glories and sacred past of the ethnic community. And this is how actually national space is constructed. And in the construction of national space, there are both pre-modern and modern concepts that are employed. And in pre-modern perspective, as you all know, states are defined by centers. Borders were indistinct, and sovereignty is faded imperceptibly into one another. And in the modern conception, we define the state, we define the nation as attached to a state, and we define the state as that is fully, flatly, and evenly operative over each square centimeter of a legally demarcated territory. But these films constructed national space in a very strange way, and they actually use both modern and pre-modern perspectives, and as a result, they reconstruct nostalgia, and they reconstruct collective memories of nationalist space. So anyway, here you can see a scene from one of those films, and well, this is how actually the story actually starts. It is usually, okay. An analysis of my films in my sample reveals that the heroes are all young, brave, and angry men who are not simply physically strong, but also intelligent to overcome the enemy, even if they are in a disadvantaged position. He's a swords master and learns how to fight when he is a child. His first teacher is mostly the father, who himself had been a loyal raider of a certain Turkish ruler. At the beginning of the movie, the hero's father is killed or imprisoned. If the hero was a child at this time, he gets motivated by his mother to learn how to fight. In fact, at some point, his mother, sister, or wife gets raped and or killed by the enemy. This, however, doesn't mean that women were all powerless in films. So at some point, they also, they also show their situation of becoming the masters of swords and knives, and they all also try to defend themselves. And this is also another scene. So our women and children, they are all associated with this place here, with this either a village or oba here village or oba, I mean the place where the hero lives, where the hero's family lives, could be considered as an allegory of the nation. And as a result, the hero takes the revenge of not only his family, but also the revenge of the entire nation. So in fact, the hero circle becomes the organic community, which is the nation. Okay, and then the hero sets the road from his home, and however, there are some cases in which the hero sets the road from the imperial capital, Istanbul. Okay, let me show another scene here, together with some other guys here. Sometimes the imperial army sets the road as well. And then the hero, okay, let's switch this. The hero, the films actually include long segments of the hero riding on horseback, which seem to be an effort to show how vast the Turkish lands are. The viewers must be already familiar with similar shots due to Western films. Besides, they easily get the idea that once upon a time, Turks were ruling all over these places. And these shots, as you see, sometimes show mountains at the back, and the horse is riding mostly through green and sometimes brown lands with some trees, and relies on the length of the time to have the desired of giving the impression that the hero has traveled so far. In some others, the scenery keeps changing from a desert to a forest, for example, or rivers, as you can see here, or sometimes other places like that. So anyway, the hero is always very dynamic, and he goes on, he travels all these different lands. And the hero's homeland is the village, as I have already mentioned, and the village is always green, as you can see here, okay? And then, the hero is always fast and furious, and there are some places he sometimes stops, like this camping place in Battal Gazi, the legend of Battal Gazi. So his camping place is even very beautiful. It means that, the river is shining beautifully. These Turkish lands are shining beautifully, and people were all living in tranquility before the arrival of the enemies. But then, it is a mystical and heavenly land piece. But then the hero goes to other places too, goes to enemy's land, and if this enemy is an Arab, and then the enemy lands are represented with these open marketplaces, which are quite, let's say, quite chaotic, as you can see in this example here. Hero sometimes goes to Yemen or Egypt, for example, and the hero sometimes stops in hotels, small hotels, known as hans or inns, let's say, for food and drink, and sometimes he spends the night there. And these hans are usually the places where the hero actually makes a rehearsal of the next fight with the enemy. And these hans are always full of these enemy people, those barbarians. And these barbarian people are quite different than the Turkish people, of course. And here you can see another hero from Tarkan, and he is always together with his wolf, but here there is the dog, but the dog is supposed to be a wolf anyway. And here is another small hotel, And well, despite all this, the hero is somehow connected to the land all the time. Here you can see this hero praying nearby the grave of probably someone from his family. And he swears on his father's grave and that he will grow to take his revenge, and the tree will be growing on his father's blood one day. Sometimes, in addition to the horse, the hero uses a ship, but these heroes always have a dismal relationship with the sea, so they are not ever shown on the open sea, but they are always on the shore, so still connected to the coast. So somehow Turks have a interesting relationship with the sea, because the sea is always known as the land of enemies. So they have this problematic relationship, okay? So the sea is always the house of problems, the house of many other conflicts. This is another scene from a movie named Tarkan, The Blood of the Vikings. So he's gonna fight against Vikings here. So the sea is also the land of, not only Vikings, but also some evil creatures in it. As you can see from this shot here, this guy, Tarkan, kills the evil octopus in an underwater struggle. So anyway, the sea is always very bad for the Turkish warriors. Okay, so let me try to summarize what I have at the end. Okay, so the land of the hero, the homeland of the hero is always very green, always very heavenly, but the land of the hero does not even have castles. Okay, the hero doesn't. Hero, but we do not see walls, we do not see castles, we just see green lands, which somehow imposes the idea that Turks once upon a time ruled over these vast areas without any borders. But when he arrives in the enemy's land, we see, open markets, very chaotic places, and also very chaotic, enemy castles. And well, the Turks are always superior. This is also the other kind of message that these films give. And once upon a time, I mean, just 2 years ago, before the pandemics, I had an interview with 50 people about how they remember those films. And depending on what my interviewers say, I could also add that the interviewers who were the viewers of these films in 1960s and 70s, they actually did not distinguish enemy lands from each other. Well, the heroes fought with so many other people in these films. They fought against Vikings, they fought against the Chinese, they fought against Vandals, Vikings. I mean, they had a variety of enemies, but somehow the viewers, they could not distinguish between these enemies, okay? The only thing that they remembered was that, well, there were some Byzantine guys, so Byzantine, because of this association with the Greeks, they always thought that the enemies were Byzantium, so the enemy lands were all Byzantine lands. We were fighting against Greeks, we always fought against Greeks since the ancient times. And at the end of the day, our enemies are always the Greeks, but we have those Turkish heroes who were also Islamic heroes who saved our lands. And the lands were all Ottoman lands. The interviewers do not even remember other Turkish empires established in the past. They all think that, well, okay, these heroes are all Ottoman heroes. So they say that these Ottoman heroes, they were living in Ottoman lands, and the Ottoman lands have been occupied by some foreigners, and these foreigners were all Greeks, and our guys saved us from these Greek enemies. So this is how the imprint of the past, the imperial past, could be seen through these movies, and this is how actually people remember both their past and also how their memory has been shaped by these films. Anyway, it was too fast and furious. Thank you very much. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen right now. So I can answer your questions. I have too much to cover, so I had to do everything quite briefly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Güldeniz, and also thank you for being the first presenter. And I'm sorry for the rough beginning. Güldeniz is actually a PhD candidate at Leiden University. And as you can see, Turkish cinema from the 50s to 70s is her research expertise. And thank you for opening up our understanding of national cinema. So if you have any questions for her, please type in the chat box and we can discuss later. So if Zhou is prepared and ready for her presentation, we will have Zhou to talk about Central Asian cinema.
I'm sorry, the computer has something wrong. My topic is Ethno-National narratives related to Cold War in Central Asia cinema from 1920 to 2020. Because it's based on the PhD dissertation. The history is very long, so I picked critical period to present my points. The first critical period is from 1920 to 1930. The East from the perspective of the other. The pan-Islamism and pan-Turkic rights in Central Asia before and after the October Revolution made the Soviet government withdraw the borders of Central Asia based on geopolitical characteristics and gradually established 5 new national aliens, ethnic. Like other allied ethnics, the Soviet Union tried to make Central Asia build an independent and equal subject identity in the connection of ancient civilization and modern civilization after long-term backward nomadism and colonization. This identity is also based on a common ideology and belief, which means the truth to liberate Central Asia. As a subsystem of the national cinema program of the USSR during the Cold War, the Central Asia cinema worked as the most important local political propaganda tool for the purpose of ethno-national integration, owing to its special geopolitical characteristics. Such important artistic functions dominated the development of cinema in the era and carefully maintained a valued position that was diametrical to the Western world. The subject in such cinema had to identify with the Soviet common national identity from the perspective of the other centered on Moscow, rather than construct an independent ethnic identity that embodied classical Islam culture and modern civilization. To do so, the ethnic heroes of Central Asia cinema obviously symbolized a subordinate ethnic identity in supporting roles such as liberated women, children, or enlightened male heroes. Such rules emphasized the ethnic integration with Russia as the center and the mainstream ideology of different periods. The second critical period is from 1954 to 1967. The awakening of subject consciousness, the golden age of movies of Central Asia. Khrushchev's short-term reform caused the golden age of Soviet culture and art, which influenced the first peak of national art of Central Asian movies. There were two distinct styles at the two levels of official discourse system and intellectual elite during the period. From 1953 to 1960, in addition to shooting many biographical movies about historical figures following Asia Navoi as ethnic culture subject, there emerged many comedies praising great achievements for Lenin's worship. Moreover, a more magnificent epic of ethnic liberation and construction was created by remaking the Oriental film of the 1920s to 1930s in the official discourse system. The external national form formed a more rigorous and hidden discipline based with institutionalized words of love and hate, with tirelessly carried out cultural and ideological construction and education for the identity, recognition of the new situation. but it failed for neglecting the reality and the loss of subject perspective. Since 1960, the excellent local filmmakers began to look for the Earth out of the mirror image of Oriental identity in the official discourse system by creating the new ethnic movies, rethinking the history and facing the reality, explore the spiritual value of human nature and the highest existence significance, although it is still modernity and enlightenment. During the short term, the movies of Central Asia finally changed from a net of shaping ethnic idols to diversified, marginalized, and personalized human world. What Central Asia audiences get from it was no longer the disciplinary identity and the worship of saints, heroes, and tradition, authority, but a reflection of the subject identity and the awareness of equal identity, and even the matches under the historical and realistic time and space. At the same time, the ethnic contradictions that deliberately hidden for a long time began to be expressed to a certain extent in many movies, which caused the Earth gradually to emerge on the map of Oriental. A third critical period is after the end of Cold Wars, during the new Cold War from 1992 to 2020 of globalization. Due to the loss of the strong support of the industrial division and the huge market of the USSR after independence, there appeared economic and political crisis in the 5 Central Asia countries with new world pattern. It caused that the loss of the national identity and the dilemma of identity has become the common theme of their films. So the film there has also lost the artistic function as guidance for others for the national identity. For the background, there is still a long way to go for the 5 Central Asia countries to develop their own national films. During the 5 Central Asia countries, they have different ways for their national movies after the end of the Cold Wars. For the Tajikistan, 2 typical film themes, the post-Soviet films that reflect on the history, the black films against the new utopia under the perennial civil war. The official discourse system, the international identity as the crossroad of civilization, the national identity as the descendants of Timur, but the successful Uzbekistan film genre has different discourse system. For the Uzbekistan, due to the loss of the reflection on the ancient and modern history and the construction of mainstream values, these successful Uzbek genres cannot play the role as a media for the construction and reproduction of national identity. For the Kyrgyzstan, the official discourse system has constructed the national identity based on the ancient history and modern history. For it, few films was created to strengthen the propaganda. However, the ground narrative has little effect because of avoiding the practical contradictions. In the discourse system of elite intellectuals, several excellent filmmakers have resorted and denied the identity of the USSR in the new form of film concepts and aesthetics. On the other hand, they have always searched for the national identity by created national heroes who embody the national culture and struggle for the national tradition in the reality. They are romantic, but cannot exist in the reality. For the Kazakhstan, in order to fully explore and even construct the common history and cultural history of Kazakhstan as an independent nation, with direct participation and support of the president, the country has made many historical films showing the national struggle for the independence and freedom. In the admonitory culture space that also emphasizes power intervention, Kazakhstan has also made a series of films reflecting on the totalitarian history of the Soviet Union, implicitly neglecting this history by showing the national suffering during the Cold Wars, so as to accept and integrate into the new national identity of contemporary Kazakhstan. Similar to George's time, a few marginal intellectuals outside the official discourse system jumped out of the new national means discourse system in individual films, faced the cultural impact and identity crisis after globalization, and showed their deep-rooted attachment and return to the romantic tradition with more novel narration skills and innovative artistic style. This part of the film has made the world more truly understand contemporary Kazakhstan, which has produced a certain response in the international film industry. So we can have the conclusion. The contemporary Central Asian films have not yet worked out of the emotion of the rebellious extreme, so objectively and comprehensively can be able to recognize and inherit the great artistic achievements of Soviet movies, then transform them into an important narrative force for the construction of national identity of films in the new era. Therefore, in order to work fully for the national identity construction, like in the Soviet era, the films of 5 Central Asia countries also need to absorb non-mainstream voices, finish the mainstream cultural ideology production mechanism with a comprehensive and systematic official film discourse system, and truly achieve the artistic view of film as guided by others based on the industrialization reform with heavy responsibilities and a long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you again for your wonderful presentation under such pressure of technical interruption. And next we have our third presenter, Ash, a PhD candidate from University of Virginia, and her research focus is on 20th century and African art, and will be presenting a paper on Congolese art through the lens of Cold War geopolitics.
Thank you. I hope you all can see my presentation. Today, I am presenting research in progress towards my dissertation in the field of art history, which in brief examines the impacts of colonialism, industrialization, and extractive economies through art and material culture produced since 1960 in and around Lubumbashi in Katanga province of modern-day Democratic Republic of the Congo. The enormous slag heap, referred to locally as the mountain, invisible from outer space, is an icon of the city and a motif throughout the artwork that I examine. This conference presents me an opportunity to work through my thinking at an early stage on periodization and framing for my project. This research departs from the question of how African art has been situated during the Cold War and considers the benefits and drawbacks of invoking the Cold War as a framing device for my own project. I will argue that the Congo, and importantly, the extraction of its mineral wealth, plays a larger role in Cold War geopolitics than is conventionally appreciated. The genre of Congolese popular painting produced in the Cold War era needs to be understood as relating to the larger global conflict, in addition to internal strife following independence from Belgium. Given time constraints, the presentation is focused primarily on just one of the artists included in my dissertation project, Chibumba Kandamatulu. His paintings have been categorized as popular art and have been largely overlooked by the field of art history. The major scholarly contributions about the artist are generally from the field of anthropology. To date, his work has not been analyzed within the framework of the global Cold War, which I believe to be a serious omission. Additionally, using the Cold War as an analytical lens on this artwork invites a reconsideration of how modernism and postcolonialism are understood in the context of the Congo and its project of nation building following independence. The conventional narrative of the Cold War organizes the world along an axis defined by the bipolar powers of the US and the USSR, who are engaged in an ideological struggle for dominance. Africa, along with most of the rest of the world, is on the periphery of this power struggle, often narrativized as merely a pawn in the binary conflict. Geopolitical maps of the Cold War, such as this azimuthal projection, visually illustrate this binary with the globe divided into two camps. Notably, the African continent is part of neither. And you can see that that's in tan on this map down here. The image of the world divided into two distinct camps, clearly demarcated and with no overlap, has been rendered inadequate. Revisionist histories of the Cold War from a global perspective seek to break with the binary approach to the history of the geopolitical conflict. The global perspective emphasizes two imperatives. One, attention needs to be paid to locally contrasting experiences of the global Cold War, and two, the analytical perspective must shift away from the centrality of the Euro-American perspective. Indeed, the Cold War was not cold in other parts of the world. African art historian and media theorist Delinda Collier has commented on the rhetorical absence of real war connoted by what she calls the fictional term Cold War. She writes, quote, "In its worst cases, global North scholarship repeats the fiction of the Cold War as cold, not an active, devastatingly violent war that was materially and conceptually connected to such far-flung places as New York, Tokyo, and Moscow." She continues, "The real sites of war are Vietnam, Afghanistan, Quito, Carnival, Sophiatown, or even the streets of Chicago," end quote. I hasten to add Lubumbashi to this list, to put Lubumbashi on the Cold War map. Lubumbashi is the capital of Haut-Katanga, the southernmost province of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the country's copper mining capital. During the Belgian Congo from 1908 to 1960, Lubumbashi was the home to the Belgian mining company Union Minière de Haut-Katanga. The company exploited the rich stores of copper, cobalt, and uranium, as well as African labor, to amass great wealth for Belgium and in turn industrialize the Katanga region. After military dictator Mobutu Sese Seko took control of the country in 1965, he renamed the company Gécamine and transformed it into a state-run operation. Through mismanagement and outright corruption, productivity was sharply reduced and the industrial infrastructure gradually fell into disrepair. Though the United States referred to its geopolitical policy as keeping the Cold War out of the Congo, I contend that Lubumbashi was a major proxy site during the Cold War. This map of Lubumbashi was produced in 1978 by the US Defense Mapping Agency, a Cold War era invention and branch of the Department of Defense. It demonstrates the strategic importance of the city for US interests as a major source of critical mineral resources that the US did not want to fall under Soviet control. One of the most strategic sites in the city was the copper smelting plant, plotted on the map to the left. And the satellite image on the right demonstrates the scale of the slag heap of mining tailings. The United States held a strong interest in the DRC for its uranium and other mineral deposits from the time of the Manhattan Project through the end of the Cold War. The uranium used in the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki came from the Shinkolobwe mine in Katanga province through a Belgian intermediary. And today, copper, cobalt, and other minerals integral to cell phone and electric car production, among other technologies, continue to be pursued by various competing international interests. A series of civil wars known as the Congo Crisis immediately preceded Mobutu's rise to power. From 1960 to 1965, these wars were fought over the fate of the mineral-rich Katanga province when local leaders attempted to secede from the new nation, then named the Republic of Congo. Despite being a series of civil wars fought in a newly sovereign nation, the United States and the Soviet Union became involved over mineral interests, with both supporting opposing factions in the fight over Katanga's secession, making the region one of the many proxy sites of violent conflict that took place during the Cold War. As the Congo Crisis began to break out, Belgium intervened militarily in July of 1960. Under the pretense of protecting European lives and property, but in reality was aiding Lumumba's enemies to bring about his demise. Lumumba sought assistance from the United Nations during the mutiny, but received none. With nowhere else to turn, he then sought help from the Soviet Union. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were watching the Congo closely, which, as the major parties in the Cold War, had interest in the uranium-rich mines of the Congo in particular. Both Belgium and the United States worked with Joseph Kasavubu, the first president of the Republic of Congo, to force Lumumba out of office. In September of 1960, Army Colonel Joseph Mobutu led a successful coup d'etat and placed Lumumba under house arrest. He managed to escape, smuggled out of his home with help from supporters. However, he was captured days later by Mobutu's troops and arrested for attempting to incite rebellion soon after Lumumba was murdered by a firing squad in Katanga. The painter Chibumba Kandimatulu's works depict these important scenes from the Congo Crisis. Before delving into one such painting, I would like to give some background on the artist. Chibumba Kandimatulu was born in 1947 in Lubumbashi. After elementary school and some technical training, he traveled through the mining towns of Katanga in search for manual work. By ambition, Chibumba wanted to become a history teacher. However, unable to fulfill this aspiration, he found another way to tell his people's history when he began painting in the mid-1960s. While living with his father in Nkasi, in Katanga province, he learned to paint by working with other local self-trained painters. He returned to Lubumbashi around 1970, where he established himself as a painter specializing in historical subjects, covering both the colonial and the immediate post-independence periods in depth. At this time, he met European expatriate university professors who taught at Lubumbashi University, including Johannes Fabian, Bogomil Juzevicki, and Victor Bol. Chibumba left Lubumbashi in the early 1980s and has not been heard from since 1982. He is considered deceased, possibly under suspicious circumstances related to the political nature of his work. I would also like to note that he repurposed empty flour sacks as his canvases, as he did not have access to conventional fine art materials. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the reverse of two of his paintings showing the insignia of the flour sacks. In addition to providing a visual history of the Congo from slavery to the colonial period and through post-independence, Chibumba's paintings are also a form of resistance to the dictatorial Mobutu regime at the time of their production. The artist's scenes were in direct opposition to the directives of state-sponsored art, which favored idyllic landscapes of the African bush and representations of the traditional arts of Africa. An instructive comparison can be found in the work of Pili Pili, a modernist Congolese painter considered under the auspices of Mobutu's state-sponsored art. Pili Pili's painting Pintades, seen here, depicts an ahistorical, idyllic scene from the imagined African bush. Mobutu's cultural policy, known as authenticité, supported apolitical and ahistorical art that presented a so-called authentic Congolese identity that was free of any reference to the recent colonial history of the young nation. By comparison to Pili Pili, Chibumba's paintings were received as politically incendiary, leading to his disappearance in the 1980s and presumed assassination by Mobutu's secret police. Reading Chibumba's paintings through a Cold War lens helps to break open the modern as it is conventionally understood in Congolese art history and shed new light on what has yet to be seen about the experience of modernity in the Congo. For my argument today, I will focus in depth on just a single painting due to time constraints. This is Chibumba's Attaque de l'Union Minière, painted in circa 1970. And it serves as a prime example of what a Cold War framework can bring to the analysis of late 20th century art produced in the Congo. The smokestack at the center of the composition and the enormous flag heap by its side mark a site of constant violent conflict during the Congo Crisis. The painting depicts a specific violent event that occurred in 1961, squarely within the Cold War period, and the titular attack on the copper smelting plant was as much a product of Cold War geopolitics as it was internal political turmoil within the fledgling nation. In 1961, at the time of the attack, the mine was still under Belgian control as UMHK. Moise Tshombe, president of the secessionist state of Katanga from 1960 to 1963, ordered the UMHK headquarters in the city of Lubumbashi to be bombed by the Katanga army. That same day, according to historical accounts, the smelter itself was attacked by the United Nations. Chibumba depicts these intercontinental entanglements with the UN military aircraft seen in the sky here and Katanga soldiers on the ground. These paintings are conventionally ascribed to the genre known as popular painting, which is understood as a form of collective memory and a way to establish national and community identity. Chibumba painted many versions of the same scenes, which he primarily sold to a local Congolese audience. Many of the paintings contain coded messages representing intentional divergences from official histories in order to invoke irony and spark discussion amongst a local audience. While I agree that these paintings serve these purposes, they must also be understood in the context of the global Cold War geopolitics and not merely framed by local or strictly regional issues. The history of the Congo, presented by Chibumba's serialized paintings on flour sacks, is also a history of land and the extraction of resources, featuring an international array of actors. The Cold War reading of Chibumba's paintings dispels some of the myths of the post-colonial in Africa generally and Congo specifically. While the Belgian colonial government pulled out of the Congo in 1960, a new phase of colonialism was ushered in. Delinda Collier characterizes this as the phase of colonization during the Cold War, based not on physical occupation of Africa, but rather on the penetration of markets. In Africa, the next phase of underdevelopment would be premised on a new set of materials, territory, and labor that could be abstracted into dematerialized finance capital, end quote. We see this neocolonialism play out in few places on the continent as intensely as in Katanga province of the DRC. The contemporary conditions in Lubumbashi and surrounding areas are directly related to the legacies of Belgian colonialism and Cold War era neocolonialism. While much of the world's copper supply still comes from Lubumbashi, the residents of the Congo do not have stable, reliable access to electricity and experience frequent blackouts. Global circuits of exchange and inequities, such as observed in the copper from Lubumbashi, are an important part of the story of the Cold War. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Ash, for the presentation, and those are really interesting paintings. I look forward to our Q&A section to talk more about it. And then next, we have Jeffery from SOAS, University of London. His research focus includes cultural politics and trends in arts development, Sinophone studies, visual culture, historiography of arts, curatorial practice, and socially engaged arts in Southeast Asia. And then this paper he's presenting is about Southeast Asian arts as canon. So Jeffery, if you're ready, you can start.
Okay, good to hear me clearly.
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. Today I will share some of my findings in the process of searching for the canonizations of the term Southeast Asia in the field of Southeast Asian modern art history. My presentation today will be divided into 3 parts. First, I will briefly mention about the historical origins of the term Southeast Asia. Then the academic formalization of the studies and research on Southeast Asian modern art history, followed by a case study of first Southeast Asian art exhibitions to exemplify how cultural diplomacy is a vital force to coin the region's Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia does not really have a stable geographic boundaries until World War II, as the Japanese army destroyed the colonial distinction in the regions, which urged the Western politicians to recognize the region in its own right and specifies its borders. Since the setup of the Southeast Asian Command in 1943 by the General Moubadan, the term Southeast Asia started to gain its currency. The study of Southeast Asian art history started earlier than this though, with archaeological reports written by French colonists in Vietnam. Amanda published his History of India and Indonesian Art in 1927, and George Cody published the Indianization State of Southeast Asia in 1944. The study of Southeast Asian art is largely confined to the ancient periods and mostly referring to archaeology at the time. And Southeast Asia continues to be a subset of Great India and Chinese civilization as land below the wind, rather than be recognized as independent regions with original culture. The start of the Southeast Asian studies formally as a discipline in the academy could be traced back to 1951, after the Thai specialist professorship appointment at the Division of Southeast Asian Affairs at the State Department. Cornell University got the funding to establish the Southeast Asian program in 1951. Then, however, the teaching of art history in Southeast Asian program emerged relatively late. Stanley O'Connor graduated from the Southeast Asia program and then hired by the university again in 1965. Then his teaching made a pragmatic shift in the studies of Southeast Asian art. He taught his students to study contemporary practice as a way to understand the past, which paved the way for his students to start writing on modern and contemporary Southeast Asian art. He has nurtured a generation of scholars such as Nora Taylor, who are now a very active player in the field. And I cannot go into further details about this due to the limited time, but moving from the sentence of the capitalist bloc, let us project ourselves into the region itself. The standard regional framework for exhibition and different cultural events might be traced back to the first Southeast Asian art exhibition and competition held in 1957 in Manila. In order to understand the cultural diplomatic side of the exhibition, we must read its socio-political context. So once the Pacific War is ended, the independent movement in Southeast Asia has been reactivated, which many partly are driven by communist power. Still, we should not just simplify Southeast Asia into two blocks due to the diversity and various national goals. No matter how, the non-communists are deeply anxious about the potential threats and not willing to see Vietnam unifications under a communist government. In the complex circumstances, culture serves as a site of ambiguity for these new independent countries to exchange its interests, organize regional networks that not entirely follow and fall into either of the ideological camps. So this first exhibition does not take place under the leadership of regional cooperation bodies such as ASEAN. In 1957, the Art Association of Philippines, a private non-government organization, hosted this exhibition in Manila. And this is the very first time that regionalism has been performed in a cultural exhibition, which shows that not only invite Southeast Asian countries, but also Australia, China, and India. The inclusion of China and India might have been a gesture to maintain a pre-modern cultural linkage to the regions. And for the case of Australia, it would be more about the importance of its diplomatic relation due to its geographical proximity. Different from artist communities, self-organized art shows, and cultural exchange events that we may imagine, this specific exhibition participant countries are corresponded by the embassy. In order to participate in the competitions, you need to represent your country, and artists have to be selected by the committee appointed by the country prior to submissions. State sponsorship are also required by their country, and also the embassy are responsible to receive and return the work from the country of origins. And even for the jury committee members, they are actually representative from the respective nations rather than any artists or cultural professions. We could notice the event is highly diplomatic and bureaucratic. The state sponsorship and endorsement on artwork as a country representation have charged the event with diplomatic legitimacy. The physical site itself is also a diplomatic field. Over 3,000 people visited the exhibitions, and including delegates to the conference, diplomats, and also civic leaders of the society. The political agency of the event reaffirmed by sponsorship of high-profile members of the society who is very invested in the political field. For example, the former president of Philippines have a drawing in the shows, and the fundraising committee is led by the current president at the time. To better understand the diplomatic agents of the events, we have to take notes of this Siam Prime Minister attempt to launch a Southeast Asian legions in 1947. Which does not realize. And Philippines at the time already gained its independence in 1946, but economic and national defense are still very heavily reliant on the US. And in 1957, addressing the rise of communism in Vietnam, US formulated the SETO, which is actually an Asian version of the Northern Atlantic Treaty Organization. But worth addressing that actually Indonesia have explicitly turned down this invitation and looked down upon it. And then Philippines adopted the culture as a soft way of diplomacy inherited from the practice from Asian African Conference. From the invitation list, we could also see the communist camp have been explicitly pushed out of the site. The North Vietnamese have not been invited. And APP constructions and presentation of Southeast Asia as a cultural region is intertwined with the American Cold War cultural diplomacy. Before the planning to organize these shows, APP had been approached by the US Information Service to host a MoMA International Program exhibition, Recent American Print in Color. Originally, the MoMA exhibitions only aims to showcase the recent technological advancement in printmaking of the US. However, APP decided to include this MoMA exhibition as a part of this Southeast Asia show, both physically and ideologically encapsulated it within the same exhibitionary frame and the space of Southeast Asia. APP intentionally blurred the two exhibitions together to make themselves becoming more interconnected and as parallel as a reflection. As you could see, you cannot really differentiate the two exhibitions from the photo. So why APP have to blend the two exhibitions together? I argue that this may be because of the APP would like to borrow cultural expression from America as a parameter or model for creating a shared and common Southeast Asia cultural identity. US as a relatively short history nations and migrant country, the diversity of the state is as vast as the multilingual and multicultural lands of Southeast Asia. The US could serve as a good mirror image for the regions to learn how to search for a communality within diversity to provide a basis for shared identities. In the selection work of the MoMA print exhibitions, print imaginary demonstrate rubrics of American with the themes of America innovations, which bring all the multicultural practice under the unifying indigenous American identities. The ideologies of multiculturalism is also being manifested through the selections of print. For example, there is quite a number of immigrant artists. For example, the Mui Cheng works that show here use the archaic Chinese calligraphy in his work. But no matter how different cultural elements have been used in these prints, they are all unified and synchronized in the style of abstract expressionism. This may also enlighten the way for Southeast Asian artists to address their distinctive cultural tradition, as well as searching for a common goal, theme, technique, or style for formulating a commonality for the Southeast Asian common identity. The common US identity of MoMA artists under such cultural tolerance illustrated the possibility of Southeast Asian identity on the basis of different national identities. Similar strategy can be seen in the jury selections. For example, the winner, Patrick Yong from Malaya, is depicting the batik, a very traditional clothing, but resemble in a modernist flat design. So, and also the Filipino and Indian winners of both selection of village landscape and figure to represent the imagery of their country, but both of them use a very similar modern Western medium of oil and expressionist style. And we could also see actually how shared cultural expression formed out of the Cold War diplomatic initiative, where these creative receptions of US cultural materials and in search of the common regional aesthetics has maintained a long-lasting theme in later cultural event hosted by ASEAN. From the notes by Ledesma, which is the president of the APP at the time, he said that he demonstrated art has served as a mediator embodiment, coining a shared regionalities as well as promoting the national identities of these post-colonial Southeast Asian states. They are also actually diplomatic organizations established based on this cultural expression as an outcome of the show. The solidifications of Southeast Asia stimulate regional agency to develop art infrastructures and create networks for cultural participation in the regions to exchange knowledge and ideas. Political breakthrough have also been made possible via art, although not in terms of military cooperations, but Indonesia has then later be included in the diplomatic bodies of most of the foreignly settled members. And we could see here they established as a result, the Pan-Asian Art Conference and Exhibition Committee, which they planned to have exhibition every 2 years, but actually this never happens until the establishment of ASEAN 10 years later. So maybe some of the arts, this shows, to sum up, this kind of show the arts have been used as a medium for cultural diplomacy, and later on, culture may not take at the center stage, but more about maybe socio-economic cooperations. And I guess I will end my presentation here.
Okay, and also thank you for presenting at 2 a.m. In the morning.
Almost 3, right? Almost 3 a.m.
It is. And now we can open up the floor to questions and feedbacks and comments. All audience participants and also presenters yourselves welcome to speak. And we actually already have a questions from Toby to Ash. So Toby said, thanks for the fascinating presentation. Without getting too deep into a reception history, I'm interested in how you characterize Chibomba as producing these works for local patrons. Why would they want to collect such pictures of traumatic scenes, especially as they reflected the present conflicts? And Ash actually typed in the answer, but we still have time. So if you want to elaborate on that, you can feel free to speak over Zoom. Ash, do you want to speak or?
Okay. I basically sort of wrote everything in response to the question, which I really appreciated. Thank you, Toby. Yeah, the scenes, and I wish I could have shown more paintings. The series that of paintings that I'm working with specifically are actually held in the collection of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts here in Richmond, but there are collections elsewhere. The Tropen Museum in Amsterdam has a collection of 100, and so there are a ton of scenes, and a really important aspect of the paintings is that they do diverge from these official histories that often will minimize the violence that occurred, for example, by not recording actual death counts in some cases. And so they are, they've been called sort of a site of mourning, where people can come together and sort of have this thing that does represent what is otherwise intentionally erased by official histories.
Yeah, thanks for responding. Again, it's a bit of a digression, but I'm just wondering about the provenance of the works that you've been studying at the collection at your university. So how did they even get there? I mean, if they were collected by local people and like, yeah.
Sure, yeah, no, so there were some expatriate European professors who taught at the University of Lubumbashi, and most famously Johannes Fabian, who he actually commissioned the series of paintings that the Tropen Museum owns now. And so those are unique in that he actually provided fine art canvas to Chibomba to paint on, whereas he typically just used the flour sacks. And so that's that collection. The collection that's at the VMFA actually was collected directly from Etienne Boll, who's the son of Victor Boll, who taught at the University of Lubumbashi, and purchased them directly from the artist. And he purchased from Chibomba's own stock, so they are on the flour sack rather than fine art canvas. And I actually worked at the VMFA as assistant curator of African art and got to acquire that collection. So it's really exciting and sort of inspired my dissertation topic. I hope that answers your question. It was a bit rambling.
Oh yeah, I did. I mean, I would like to ask other follow-up questions, but I don't want to take up everyone's time. Yeah.
Actually, Matea has a question.
Oh, thank you. Although I would also like to hear Toby's question.
Oh, we can follow up on that after.
Okay, shall we do mine and then Toby's Toby's question again? Oh, thank you for wonderful presentations. We had 5 great presentations, and it made me wonder. It's 3 presentations, first, third, and fourth, focused more on the institutional art or institutionalized art, whereas third and second by Güldeniz and fifth by Toby focused more on non-institutional or non-institutionalized artists, or what you would say, how ordinary people create art and in response to what, and how then the subject of art changes, which made me think about the relationship and the dynamic between memory and history and how different they are. Memory is oftentimes something with that challenges the hegemony of history as something very personalized, something subjective, something that is not institutionalized or ordered or presented as a linear, nice narrative that fits into the institutional discourses. And to that extent, I was also thinking, and perhaps this is something I wanted to ask you all, how then would you think about these relationships between art history, art memory, and art historiography? How we write art history and how we think and understand art history, but then this art history and art memory dynamic that we see in institutionalized and non-institutionalized spaces. And that brings me also to the second part of the comment/question. The 2 non-institutionalized artists in the Congolese art and also in the artists presented to us by Toby, we see them engaging with modernity. For example, not Congolese art, but yes, it is in Congolese art, sorry. For example, the artist is painting industrial chimneys. And in Toby's presentations, those what you called cyclos reminded me of rickshaws, which were brought or spread around Asia by the British who were colonizing, and they were kind of seen as one of the modern wheels or modern vehicles. On the opposing side, in other 3 presentations, not opposing, but alternative, or talking about the institutionalized art and art history, in films in Turkey, and also in the, yes, and the first one, the Central Asian cinema, and then the birth of the region, we see how history is being made through these, what I would term as ethno-fictions, ethnographies and ethno-fictions as a way of very masculinist, and it's impressive. The absence of women is just so stark here, the absence of women. And we see this masculinist patrilinear legacy of bringing from generation to generation this, what is nation or national identity, and then what is history. And in these narratives, very often the industry and the modernity are absent, and they become sort of nostalgic utopias and ethno-fictions, whereas the 2 presentations presented something non-institutionalized and then dealing with modernity and industry. But anyway, sorry, that was a very long comment/question, but I was wondering if in your work you are reflecting also on this art history, art memory, and art historiography, and then different narratives that emerge around them. Thank you.
Yeah, could I respond to that first? I mean, I think I just wanted to make a clarification because I guess I didn't get to track Nguyen-Hatsushiba's entire career, so it might not be very clear, but I would definitely consider him to be an institutionalized artist, even though he's not a national artist per se. But he went through very typical artist formal training in America. And then, like I mentioned, all of his later works were all commissions, right? So there's no way for him to produce his work without being tied to institutional structures, although obviously the institution we're speaking about here is of a very different nature to begin with. But when it comes to art historiography, also part of my paper that I had cut out was a sample critique of his work by a writer at Art Forum, who basically said that his later works in the Memoir Project series failed to captivate the same sense of exotic imaginary, basically, because he wasn't utilizing the icons that you mentioned, like the Siglo, the trishaw, in the same way that he did in that first work. And so it became very apparent to me that obviously, as he developed this form, there were certain things that were sticking to a Euro-American audience that did not get to persist in subsequent editions. And I'm very interested to see what exactly allows that to, what about his work is legible, and what about the form of the work allows his work to be legible in the first place, right? Because technically he is talking about things that people would not understand at all. And obviously there's no textual description of what's going on, right? So that has always been interesting to me. And I think, I can't remember anymore. But yes, so there were so many things I wanted to respond to in your comment, but let somebody else respond.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other responses?
Maybe I could also go to make some clarification. Maybe I could also use the photo from my PowerPoint to work through it. So basically, on how to write about how we write art history, or how we do art historiography, is exactly what I am trying to do. And why am I choosing Southeast Asia as a topic? Because Southeast Asia, compared to different Asian arts category, like Korean art, Chinese art, Japanese art, it is the only kind of art category, I mean, more dominant art category, that does not really use the national base framework as a disciplinary discourse here. And I would say for art historiography, I mean, through my kind of research and reading through how Southeast Asia get to become a discipline, and how it get to study as a region, but not study as a single nation. In fact, actually, when we go to later books and stuff like that, for example, Nora Taylor anthology on Southeast Asian art, there is actually few essays that is actually national based. And in fact, Nora Taylor's own dissertations, it's very ethnographic, pure on Vietnam. So somehow I would say, whether it is regional or just national art history, it's mainly because of the political circumstances and more about economic circumstances, because they do not have enough fundings. Unlike Japan, they have Japan Foundation, Korean, they have Korean Culture Fund to fund their own national art history institutions. Southeast Asia, unfortunately, not given the very economic disparities between all the ASEAN members, I'm afraid that they do not have the financial resource to do so. And even nowadays, art history is not written within academy inside Southeast Asia. The only academy program is the Lhasa Art Institute, and also a minor degree in art history in the NUS, which is under the English department, interestingly. And it have the voice of Southeast Asia has actually been taken by Australia, and also maybe ancient arts, Leiden, and also SOAS, and as well as Cornell, of course. So responding to the ethnographic fiction issues, and also about the modernist issue. In fact, interestingly, this first Southeast Asia exhibition is actually the second exhibition after a major split of the APP. the Art Association of the AAP Philippines, which actually the more tradition wings or left the association. So only the modernists, which is non-realistic paintings, we could see from this magazine, these paintings, except this one, and this is a Vietnamese one, yeah, or actually exhibited in the competitions. And we could see none of them are very, realistic depictions of scenes. Of course, their subjects are very ethnographic in a sense, because they need to reflect the kind of the accents of their country. For example, why the Patek is behind this is a government-oriented selection, because Malaysia has been having trouble for searching or building up their own identity. So they need to find something to create actually unreal, but forcefully coined cultural roots, which namely Batik, which actually Indonesia also have a very rich traditions of doing such textile. So, and the last point that I should respond on is about, so maybe seemingly is these actions of creating a national allegory or being a real political field seems like very manly and masculine. But actually, in the context of Philippines, women have a very large role in playing in the political field. For example, the president, the chairperson of the AAP at that time, I cannot pronounce the Spanish, Latimas, is actually a woman. And if you remember, on the first day, another presenter present on the CCP of in Manila, the cultural center, the Met in Manila. Actually, the director is Mr. Marcos. So you could see it's always the woman in charge of this. And Ledesma is the chairperson of AAP itself, is the one who contacted or being contacted by the USIS, the Information Service. So it is rather uncertain because of incomprehensive records of the events, how later on they pitch, for example, Indonesia through this exhibition, or asking them to join the later AAS or ASEAN. But we could see very, very clearly at least this very wealthy woman is involved in these political scenes to serve as the tools or helping up to build up these channels and networks for later political exchange and building the foundations of ASEAN.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
How
you.
I stop sharing.
Thank
Okay.
you. Any response?
We can either take responses or
Yeah, we have 2 more minutes. So,
or if
Okay.
anybody has questions, or yes.
I can just say something. Thank you very much for your comments, by the way, because you actually summarized in a very beautiful way what I am trying to say. My films are, of course, reflections of the context, the political and historical context, and also, the cultural context. They are the reflections of increasing conservatism, increasing nationalism, and of course, increasing masculine values in the society at this time period. And for the elites, for the intellectual elites, who are the ones writing history, who are the ones writing art history, these films are just simply examples of bad taste. So the films that I am talking about here, they simply do not exist in art historiography of Turkey, which thinks itself as much more Western and modern, by the way. And in fact, my heroes here, my national heroes here, they all stand for, examples of role models for rural life. Rural life is in fact very significant because it is the area where heroes perform their masculinities, where they show their masculinities. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much to all the presenters, regardless what time is it at your area. This is a very long section, and thank you so much for your effort and then also your attention and your support to this conference. And it's really good and eye-opening to get to know all this research. And also new forms of arts and cinema in different regions and countries. So this is the end of our session, and we hope to see more of your work in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.